Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another episode of the Nuanced series. Under today's episode, we are going to discuss the importance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine, which happened yesterday, and we will comprehensively analyze this topic to understand the significance of this important visit. So before we start, if you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now let me also tell you what we are going to focus upon in this session. First, we will examine the context in which Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine took place. We will understand the implications of the visit, and also there has been a lot of hype created by Indian media that India might play the role of a broker or a mediator to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to an end. So let's examine these claims and also look at the broader interests of India in Central and Eastern Europe and what explains these visits of Prime Minister Modi to Ukraine and as well as to Poland. Because before visiting Ukraine, Prime Minister Modi visited Poland as well. And just 6 weeks ago, around 1.5 months ago, PM Modi had visited Russia as well. So this marks a new vision of India towards Central Eastern Europe and the Eurasia region, and hence there are bigger interests involved. There are bigger dimensions involved in this visit, and it's not just about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So let's examine all these points in a comprehensive and quick manner so that any question in your UPSC exams, you should be able to answer that. So let's begin with the arrival of Prime Minister Modi in Ukraine. I'm sure many of you would have already seen these extraordinary images of PM Modi meeting Ukrainian President Zelensky and hugging the leader and expressing condolences for the losses that the country has suffered in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. In fact, Ukraine had even arranged a visit to a museum or essentially a place where tribute was being paid to the victims of the war, and a display was put up to show how Ukrainian children have suffered immensely because of the consequences of this war. So PM Modi, who visited the site along with the Ukrainian president, paid respects to those Ukrainians who have lost their lives, especially the children, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky, thus sending a powerful message from India. It was a symbolic gesture from India that India stands with the human suffering that Ukrainians have gone through because of this war. Now, please also note that Prime Minister Modi arrived in Ukraine in a very unique manner. Generally, world leaders, they arrive through aircrafts. But Prime Minister Modi arrived in Ukraine, in Kiev, through a train which is popularly referred to as Rail Force One. Because PM Modi first paid a visit to Poland, signed a few important agreements with this Central European country, and from Poland he took a train journey of around 700 kilometers lasting 10 hours to reach Kiev. Now, this is a very special train that world leaders have been taking from Poland to Ukraine in the last 2 years. Because ever since Russia invaded Ukraine and the war broke out, Ukrainian airspace has been completely shut. Foreign aircraft are not allowed, and hence world leaders who have been visiting Ukraine, they have been arriving on this train which has been dubbed Rail Force One. Even US President Joe Biden, when he visited Ukraine, he took the same train, and that's the reason why it was named tentatively as Rail Force One, which is a reference to Air Force One, which is the official air transport for the US president. Many European leaders, from Emmanuel Macron of France to then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and many other world leaders who have visited the country after the war broke out, they've all taken the train route from Poland because the Ukrainian airspace has been completely shut since the war. So PM Modi arrived in Kiev in this special transport, and after arriving in the capital, immediately got down to business. He met with Zelensky and held important negotiations, not just about the Russia-Ukraine war and how India could possibly contribute to bring this war to an end, but also many other issues were discussed and both countries have agreed to elevate their relationship to the strategic partnership level. A few key agreements were signed, and India has provided some assistance as well to Ukraine to help the country in the ongoing war efforts. So this signals India's outreach towards Central Europe and Eastern Europe and the Eurasia region, which has largely been a neglected region in Indian foreign policy. Because see, this visit of PM Modi to Ukraine is the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister since the country was formed. I hope you know that Ukraine, prior to 1991, was part of the Soviet Union. But as the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union disintegrated and collapsed, and when these new countries were born in Central Asia and in Eastern Europe, Ukraine was born in 1991. And since Ukraine becoming independent, no Indian leader had visited the country. Probably because India's traditional relations, especially during the Cold War, was always with the Soviet Union. India had been a very close ally of the Soviet Union. But post the Cold War, India started diversifying its relations and started focusing more on the Western countries. So in general, Ukraine has received a lower priority in our foreign policy, especially before the war started. If you look at Poland as well, it had been more than 4 decades since an Indian Prime Minister visited Poland. But in the initial years of the Cold War, Poland was a priority country for India because Poland was part of the Warsaw Pact, which had brought the communist powers together under the leadership of the Soviet Union. So given India's inclination towards the Soviet Union during the Cold War, 3 Indian Prime Ministers had visited the country. First starting with Nehru, then Indira Gandhi and then Morarji Desai. So after this visit by Morarji Desai in 1979, no Indian leader had visited Poland as well. So over the last 45 years, Central and Eastern Europe and in general the Eurasia region has received a lower priority in Indian foreign policy. So that is something the Modi government is trying to correct. India is making a big foray into Europe, trying to create a bigger diplomatic space in Central and Eastern Europe by carrying out these historic visits to Poland and Ukraine. Of course, the war has cast a shadow on the visit. That is the reason why the entire media attention is entirely on the possible role of India as a mediator, which could bring out a peace plan, a peace solution to help Russia and Ukraine end this war. But there are critics who point out that these claims are a little exaggerated. So let's examine and analyze all these developments from both the perspectives. Now, if you look at PM Modi's visit to Russia in July, this attracted a lot of criticism from Ukraine and also from Western countries. Immediately after winning the 3rd term in this year's general elections, PM Modi carried out his first major bilateral visit to Russia. He met with Russian leader Putin, embraced Putin and called Russia an all-weather friend of India, which clearly symbolizes the special partnership between India and Russia. Both the countries have shared a very special relationship because Russia or its predecessor Soviet Union has always stood with India during difficult times, from the Kashmir issue to the 1971 war to supporting our military modernization and our nuclear and space program. India as well has always stood with Soviet Union and Russia during its challenging times. From the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan to the collapse of the Soviet Union and even the recent invasion of Russia into Ukraine. In all these challenging circumstances, India has stood with Russia, given complete support to Russia. And as a result, when PM Modi visited Russia, he would become one of the first leaders from a major democratic country after the war started to visit Russia to meet Putin. So naturally, this attracted criticism from Ukraine and from Western countries. The United States and European countries have always been critical of India's close ties with Russia, especially after the war started. And Ukrainian leader Zelensky went public with his criticism, and he said it was a big disappointment that the leader of the world's largest democracy was visiting Russia and meeting the world's most bloody criminal in Moscow. So this was a very harsh and a strong statement to come out from Zelensky, and this in a way infuriated India as well. because Zelensky was using very harsh language to describe this visit of Indian Prime Minister to Russia. So during this visit to Russia, India signed several important agreements with Russia as well. We continued our diplomatic support to Russia in the war, because till date India has not condemned Russia for its illegal invasion into Ukraine. India has protected Russia at every vote at the United Nations by abstaining from these votes. And more importantly, India has bypassed the Western sanctions. We have continued to trade with Russia, and we have been one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil, which has in a way helped fund the Russian war in Ukraine. Plus, many key agreements were signed, including trade, defense, etc. And India and Russia have even announced a shorter maritime link between Chennai and Vladivostok. So when all these announcements were made, it attracted a lot of criticism from Ukraine and Western countries, and India was blamed for warming up to an aggressor country like Russia and an alleged war criminal like Putin. So now India appears to be correcting that image. This is the balancing act of India, which is always seen in our foreign policy, be it during the Cold War or be it in contemporary times. India has always managed to take the middle path. During Cold War rivalries, we were non-aligned initially for few years, maintaining our distance between the West and the Soviet bloc. We neither aligned entirely with the democratic capitalist powers led by US, nor with the communist socialist powers led by the Soviet Union. But eventually, as the West became hostile to India, especially the United States, when it threatened India during the 1971 war, that is when India abandoned non-alignment and firmly aligned with the Soviet Union. But after the Cold War had ended, India had maintained its position of neutrality, and from non-alignment we transformed our position into all alignment or multi-alignment. Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar calls India's policy of working with every country irrespective of their mutual issues. He labels this as the multi-alignment policy of India. We'll work with Russia, we'll work with Ukraine as well. We'll work with United States, we'll work with Russia as well. Because India wouldn't like to get involved in the bilateral issues that other countries might have. We are pursuing a pragmatic, a realistic foreign policy to protect Indian interests and to stabilize the world and to maintain peace and stability in the world. So this approach of India sometimes is seen as a neutral approach. Some call it a balanced approach of India. India labels this as the policy of multi-alignment, and this leads to criticism against India as well. India is often criticized that we are simply a bystander, that we simply watch on the sidelines even when atrocities are being committed. But I don't entirely agree with this criticism. India counters this criticism as well correctly, because any country in geopolitics, they pursue their realistic interests, their pragmatic interests. You can't be idealistic all the time. But at the same time doesn't mean that India has encouraged atrocities. For example, if you look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Prime Minister Modi has been urging Putin from almost 1.5 to 2 years to bring the war to an end. India has insisted that only a peaceful solution is a way forward to stabilize the region. When PM Modi met with Putin during the Bali G20 summit in 2022, he clearly told Putin explicitly that this is not the time for war, because the world had already been disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the world didn't need another disruption. India has repeatedly stated to Russia and as well as Ukraine to sit and talk to each other, to negotiate with each other and work out a negotiated end to this conflict. So that shows that India is not just neutral, or it's not just taking a balanced position. We are being multi-aligned, yes, to protect our strategic ties with Russia. At the same time, we balance it out by pushing for a negotiated settlement, by helping Ukraine when necessary, and by siding with the Western countries as well, as and when required. So this multi-aligned approach of India serves India very well, and this was very evident as well during PM's visit to Ukraine yesterday. Ukraine's leader Zelensky urged Prime Minister Modi to interfere, to talk to Russia. He said that India has the leverage on Russia to influence Putin to stop this brutal war. This clearly shows that Ukrainian strategic establishment truly believes that India has a degree of influence on Russia which can be used to convince Putin to end the war. And Prime Minister Modi responded to this statement by saying that, look, we are not neutral. We are not simply a bystander. We are not simply standing on the sidelines. We are urging both the countries to work towards peace. India has repeatedly said that solutions to conflicts cannot be found on the battlefield. India has insisted that you can't find answers to disputes and issues by fighting wars, by incurring severe losses, human and economic losses. India has pushed both Russia and as well as Ukraine. And PM Modi reminded this to Zelensky as well, that talk to Putin, sit across the table, negotiate. The similar message was conveyed by Prime Minister Modi when he met Putin last month as well. So this is what puts India in this unique position. Given our multi-aligned approach, where we align with West, including United States, where we support Ukraine where necessary and remain committed to our traditional friendship with Russia, this puts India in a unique position, and probably this is what leads Indian media and many experts to predict that India might come out with a peace plan. India might come out with a master stroke to bring Russia, Ukraine to the negotiating table and work out a peaceful settlement. So this could be one of the possibilities. We can't rule that out. It might be possible in the coming weeks, in the coming months, where India might play a positive role as a negotiator, as a mediator, using its unique influence. In fact, no other country has that unique position where we can work with West, the Ukraine and Russia. What is interesting is that even China was recently appreciating India, which is quite rare. When PM Modi visited Russia and parallelly pushed for peaceful talks on the Ukrainian side, even the Chinese Foreign Ministry appreciated the Indian position. That shows the unique position of India and how India can leverage this to ensure that the Russia-Ukraine war ends, because this has really impacted the global economy and the geopolitics of Europe and Eurasia. Now, there are other developments that we need to keep in mind when we consider this possibility of India acting as a mediator. Recently, Ukraine has mounted a counterstrike. It has launched a major offensive into the Kursk region and occupied nearly 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory. Until now, it was Russia which was in occupation of Ukrainian territory. Russia had annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. And after the war began in 2022, Russia annexed the Donbas region, where it had sponsored a pro-Russian separatist movement in Donetsk and Luhansk. And further, it has captured this entire territory from Kherson to Mariupol, including the Zaporozhye nuclear plant. So Ukraine has suffered severe territorial losses in eastern and southern Ukraine. Now Ukraine has mounted a counter-attack. It has gone into an offensive mode and launched a new front by attacking the Kursk region and capturing the Kursk region along with Russian POWs. So potentially this gives Ukraine an edge, and many analysts are calling this a very bold, brave move by Ukraine. But this could turn the other way around as well, because Russia may not take this lying down. Russia may retaliate with more aggression, further widening the conflict and escalating the conflict. Also, Ukraine sees that in the Kursk region, it has gained a lot of advantages because Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, including gas pipelines, are present over here. The terminals which control the gas supply to Europe are present in the Kursk region. There is a nuclear power plant as well, which now falls under Ukrainian control. So Ukraine might be hoping that tomorrow, if there is a negotiated settlement, Ukraine might suggest a bargain, a trade-off, that if Russia returns the occupied territories in Crimea, in eastern and southern Ukraine, then maybe Ukraine will give up its occupation of the Kursk region. But such a trade-off may not be practical and may not be possible because Russia may not agree to it as well. Russia occupies more than 1,00,000 square kilometers. Why will Russia agree for a trade-off just to take back 1,000 square kilometers of its land? So critics are saying that this Ukrainian offensive might backfire as well. It might escalate the conflict, or if you look at the other perspective, it might push Russia on the back foot. Eventually, the stalemate in this war could be brought to an end through talks where there might be a potential exchange of territory, bringing this war to an end. So given these recent developments, India does have a role to play. If not a defining role, definitely there is a role for India to work with both the sides, to influence both of them, to sit across the table and talk to each other. Now this is the reason why Indian media has been hyping the role of India, that India might come out with a solution, might act as a mediator to bring this war to an end. So many experts believe that as well. But there is a counter theory as well. I present to you the argument of one of India's top strategic geopolitical experts, C. Raja Mohan. Raja Mohan says that we are reading too much into this visit. See, this visit is not necessarily about the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, that is a key point of discussion. India wants to play a positive role, but that's not the entire focus. This visit, according to C. Raja Mohan, is about India's renewed focus on Central and Eastern Europe. It's about India creating more space for itself in Europe to play a bigger role in global geopolitics. So, of course, India's role is crucial in ending the war, but India alone can't play a determining role. This is an over-exaggeration of Indian influence on Putin, on Russia and Ukraine. We don't exercise that kind of influence to convince Putin or to convince Ukraine to talk and settle this war. And neither Russia nor Ukraine are expecting that from India. They are waiting for American elections to be concluded this year. In the meanwhile, they are strengthening their ground position by occupying more territory. They know that any future solution will come from the West. The US will play a determining role. Even China may not be able to play a determining role. So there is no question of India playing a determining role in resolving this conflict. India-China might exert a positive influence, but on the sidelines. We might push both of them to talk and help them to arrive at a negotiated settlement, but we may not be able to play a determining role as it has been projected. They are waiting for American elections to get over, and they would like to deal with a new government which comes in the United States. And also, don't forget, there has already been a peace conference in Switzerland. It's not that Ukraine needs a new peace plan. It's not that Modi can whip out a new plan which will surprise the entire world. Ukraine doesn't need a peace plan from India. What Ukraine needs from India is more understanding of the seriousness of the conflict and the impact of the war on Ukraine. Because Ukraine looks at India as a leader of the global south, as a leader of the developing, underdeveloped world. The global south in general has taken a stance in favor of Russia, and that is what Ukraine would expect. It would expect the global south to change its position, and it should begin with India, according to Ukraine. As Ukraine sees India as the leader of the global south, it would expect India to develop a better understanding of the suffering of Ukraine, to put more pressure on Russia to end this illegal war, which is a violation of the UN Charter. So Zelensky is not expecting a magic solution from Modi. Putin will not be overnight convinced by Modi. We don't have that kind of influence or leverage as well. So C. Raja Mohan presents a more realistic picture. He says that yes, India will play a role, a positive role in pushing both sides to try to bring this war to an end. But doesn't mean we are going to play the determining role. When China is not able to do that, he doesn't see a way India doing it. So this war, if it has to end, it will require the initiative of Russia, has to come from Putin, and it has to come from United States. Because to begin with, this was essentially a proxy war involving United States and Russia. If they are able to talk and work out the issues with each other, that is when the war is likely to end. Now, if this is the argument we are making, that India is not going to play a determining role in ending the war, then what was the purpose of this visit? Of course, one purpose was to express solidarity with Ukraine, to stand for the suffering and the violations that Ukraine has suffered and express that sympathy, and also to give assistance and to renew our relationship with Ukraine and create a space for India in Central and Eastern Europe, which has long been neglected in our foreign policy. As we discussed at the beginning, I told you that in more than 45 years, no Indian leader had visited Poland. Since Ukraine was born in 1991, no Indian Prime Minister had visited Ukraine. So this is an opportunity to India to renew its focus on Central and Eastern Europe, which is a gateway to European heartland. If India wishes to step up its global profile, it's very crucial to engage with all the European powers, and this is very evident under Modi's leadership. Dr. Jaishankar has carried out multiple visits to Europe, including Central and Eastern Europe in the last few years. PM Modi has stepped up the engagement with Central and Eastern Europe, and that is what you are seeing here. Because see, China is already playing a bigger role in this region. China has tried expanding its Belt and Road Initiative. into Central and Eastern Europe. China is playing a bigger role than India in shaping the conflict in Ukraine and in shaping the geopolitics of the Eurasia region. So it's high time for India to step in and protect its own interests by countering the Chinese influence. And it is this attempt of India that you are seeing, an attempt to create more flexibility, more diplomatic space for India, because we do have important relations with Poland and Ukraine. So this visit is an attempt to revive those relations, to re-establish India as a significant player in Central and Eastern Europe. That of course involves Indian influence to help in end the war, but that is not the only focus of the visit. This essentially paves the way for a revival of India's ties with Ukraine, because ever since the war began, our trade relationship has completely suffered. Our bilateral trade volume was around $3.3 billion. This has dropped to just around $0.7 billion. Because don't forget, Ukraine is a key supplier of food and agricultural commodities. It's considered as a food basket of the world. Ukraine is a major exporter of wheat, sunflower oil, various seeds, corn, soybean, etc. Even Russia is a major exporter of food grains. So shipment of food grains was affected when the war broke out through the Black Sea, and it led to a food security crisis which affected India as well. It disrupted the global oil markets and the food markets and commodity prices, which has affected the supply chains, which has hurt the global economy and the Indian economy. So reviving Ukrainian economy and reconstructing Ukraine's economy is critical. It is in India's interest. And also don't forget, Ukraine supplies few critical defense components to India. Now this dates back to the Soviet era, when we were procuring Soviet era military equipment from Soviet Union. A lot of these defense factories and the spare parts and components, right, they were being produced in Ukraine. Even today, after Ukraine broke out from Soviet Union, many of these defense industries are located in Ukraine. They have continued to supply key spare parts and components which are crucial for our battle tanks, our rockets and artillery guns, and our naval ships. So India would like to protect that defense relationship, as Ukraine remains a supplier of certain essential military equipment, including spare parts and components, which is needed to upgrade the Soviet era military equipment that we have. So there is a strategic defense angle involved. Of course, India would like to play a role in improving connectivity in the region as well, to improve the opportunities for Indians in Central and Eastern Europe. Indian students, Indian workers are looking for plenty of opportunities. Ukraine, until the war began, was a hot destination for medical students from India. That's why when the war broke out, nearly 20,000 Indian students were trapped and we had to evacuate them through Operation Ganga. Now, despite the war continuing, many students have returned back to their colleges in Ukraine. So there are plenty of opportunities where we can work upon economic relations, especially food security, agriculture, disaster management assistance, and providing aid and support for Ukraine in its reconstruction efforts, focusing on connectivity, people-to-people relations, cultural relations. Now, who doesn't remember the image of this majestic building in Kiev, the Mariinsky Palace, which is the official residence of the Ukrainian president, right? Especially Indians, I'm sure all of you recognize this building from the popular movie RRR, which popularized this location through its Oscar-winning song Natu Natu. This is where the song was shot before the war. Now, the reason why I am mentioning this is because this is exactly where Modi met Putin. Can you see the background here? Right? This is the official residence of Zelensky. This symbolizes the potential for building cultural ties, people-to-people relations, economic and trade relations, and how India can contribute to revive tourism in Ukraine, to revive the economy, to become a key procurer of Ukrainian goods and commodities. So there are a lot of opportunities available, and that is the reason why this visit is a significant visit. So apart from discussing the Russia-Ukraine war and how India can play a role in influencing Russia to end the conflict, apart from that, the two countries have signed 4 critical agreements. They have elevated the relationship to strategic partnership level, and 4 key agreements were signed. One is to deal with humanitarian assistance from India to help Ukraine overcome the impact of the war. I'll explain what kind of assistance is India looking to provide. I'll come to that point. India is looking to get involved in development and reconstruction projects to rebuild Ukrainian economy and its infrastructure, which has been damaged by the war. Plus, we have signed an agreement in agriculture and food industry sector to promote collaboration in the agriculture and food processing industry, to promote cultural relations, and as well as to supply medicines and drugs from India. Because obviously, Ukraine's war efforts require aid and assistance and medicines and drugs from other countries, and India can be a key supplier. So these 4 key agreements were signed, and as part of humanitarian assistance, India has gifted the Bhishma cubes, which are these mini medical camps that have been developed indigenously by India. Bhishma stands for Bharat Health Initiative for Sahyog Hita and Maitri cubes, which was sponsored by Ministry of Defence. Indian institutions have developed this health camp. It's essentially a mobile medical camp which can be used in war zones, conflict zones, and disaster locations. It has been developed as part of Arogya Maitri Project Bhishma initiative to develop critical trauma care facilities, which was funded by the Defence Ministry. So it's a mobile medical facility which you can easily set up. It's like a tent or a camp which consists of all the required equipment, machinery, medicines and equipment, which turns this into a critical trauma care unit. Close to 100 patients who have survived a natural disaster or who have been injured in a war or a conflict, they can be treated up to 48 hours, and it is a self-contained unit. It has its own power supply, it has a mini ICU, ventilator support, blood testing equipment, X-ray equipment, even surgeries can be carried out for life-saving interventions. So it's a fully equipped, self-contained trauma care unit, and India has gifted this free of cost to Ukraine as part of the aid, the relief material and humanitarian assistance that we are providing to Ukraine. So that's why I pointed out that this visit is much more than the Russia-Ukraine war. So don't be misled by the media, by the narrative that India is playing some magical role to end this war. That may not happen. But definitely there is an influence we can exert on both Russia, Ukraine, and that is what India has been doing. We are not entirely neutral, we are not simply bystanders. Yes, we have sided with Russia to an extent because we have an age-old traditional relationship. Russia has stood with us when no one else stood with India. That's why we have bypassed the sanctions, because we never follow unilateral sanctions imposed by one or few countries. We have protected the trade relationship, the close strategic military partnership with Russia. Russia remains a key supplier of military equipment. Russia has become a key oil supplier, and we have been purchasing discounted Russian oil, which is good for the Indian economy, which brings down our import bill. So West might allege that we are funding the Russian war, but the reality is we are just looking after our own interests, and we are expressing our gratitude to Russia by not condemning Russia, by not voting against Russia, because Russia has stood with India repeatedly. Is that clear? When we conducted the nuclear tests, Russia was one of the few countries which didn't condemn India and didn't impose sanctions on India. When we liberated Goa from Portuguese control, Russia was the one which stood with India at the United Nations Security Council. And even with Pakistan and China, with regard to our hostilities and boundary issues and conflicts, Russia has consistently stood with India. So that is just a return favor from India, but doesn't mean we encourage the war, doesn't mean we tolerate the invasion that Russia has done, which is a violation of the UN Charter. That's why we are urging Putin, we are urging Ukraine as well to talk to each other, end the war through peaceful talks and negotiations. So this visit to Ukraine and Poland is much more than the conflict, and it signifies India's foray into Europe, into Central and Eastern Europe, because we have stepped up our engagement across European region. Remember the EFTA free trade agreement with EFTA countries, India EFTA free trade agreement. We are negotiating a free trade agreement with European Union as well. We are focused on many trade, technology and defense and security initiatives with France, Germany, Italy, UK. Because historically, India's foreign policy has been very narrow-minded when it comes to Europe. In the Europe region, we have just focused on the big four: Russia, Germany, France and Britain. We haven't paid much attention to other parts of Europe, the Scandinavia region, Central and Eastern European region, or Baltic and Balkan region. This is the renewed approach of India under the Modi leadership that you are witnessing. We are part of the IMEC initiative, India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which was announced at the G20. So this gives an opening for India to engage with Europe and establish better connectivity that can help us counter the Chinese presence and influence. European powers also want to play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific, like France, Italy, UK, Germany. They want a bigger presence in Indo-Pacific to counter Chinese aggression. So we have common interests. So it is this approach of India that you see during PM Modi's visit to Poland and Ukraine. So on this note, I would like to bring this discussion to an end. I hope it has been a useful session and I hope you have understood everything. If you benefited from the session, please let me know through your likes, more importantly through your comments, and do share the video with other aspirants. That is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.